This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to the Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. I'm excited to have a really delightful guest that is impacting the U.S. from a business perspective, and I think I would stretch to say impacting globally, given her work with leaders that cross continents and cross the globe from the work that they provide from a business perspective. Emma Hinchliffe. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you on the program. So you're currently in New York.
I am in Brooklyn right now.
Now, I've met so many people just in the past week that are from Brooklyn. And I know that it's going through an evolution, it's growing and changing and expanding. And I hear it's such an incredible place to be.
Oh, it's just the best. If you come by, you'll have to spend some time here.
Now, you grew up in the area, but today you are the editor of Fortune's Most Powerful Women, which is an incredible program. You have a summit that takes place every year. Tell me about what it is that you do for Fortune and what this means from a Fortune perspective.
I would love to. Fortune Most Powerful Women is a franchise that has been around for now almost 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So it definitely predates me. I've been at Fortune over the past 7 years and I'm now in a role leading editorial for the Most Powerful Women franchise. So everything that is in our newsroom, content that's published in our daily newsletter, our annual list of the 100 most powerful women in business around the world. That content I am leading through our newsroom. So it is a journalistic approach to understanding where women are leading in the business world, where there are gaps, and the stories that come out of that leadership.
Now, that's a big role. Here's what's fascinating. The other day, I was just looking through a couple of items, and I wanted to make sure I reviewed some of the women that are leading companies throughout the country. And on several of those sites, including Wikipedia, the resources and the references that were used to create the article, all of them came from you. It was.
I love that. You'll have to send me that screenshot so I can see for myself.
It was the funniest thing. I look at every one of the items that they used to build the article. Every single one, Emma. It was absolutely amazing. So I am totally honored to have you on the program. Why is this segment so important, Emma? Like I've seen some amazing women lead organizations. I think often to eBay in the early days of eBay and Meg Whitman and what she did to build eBay. And then you look at some of the others, the female CEO of Yahoo back at a time that they were making a big transition. Incredible. One inspired the launch of this segment? And then two, how did you become involved?
Yes. Well, the Most Powerful Women franchise started as a list in 1998, I believe.
Okay.
And my former colleague at Fortune, Patty Sellers, was noticing that more women were rising to the top of business and thought that seemed a trend worth examining. The most notable statistic to me from that project is that on the very first list, there were only 2 CEOs out of 50 women.
In 1998.
Yeah, women simply did not have those jobs. And so the women who were the most powerful in American business at that time were in other positions. And now when we do the list of 100 most powerful women, it's 100 women around the globe, not just in the US. And there are 25 Fortune 500 female CEOs who don't even make the list, which shows just how competitive it is and how far women have come.
Right.
So it's really my honor to, kind of along with my colleagues, lead this franchise into its next era and an era in which women are really in these positions in a more serious way.
Now, and so you mentioned it, you kind of alluded this, but what do you think that era looks like in full scope? And you're right there. You look at Dick's Sporting Good, you look at General Motors, both being led by female CEOs, Fannie Mae, just some incredible leaders today. And the number continues to grow. There are over 50 in the U.S. today of Fortune 500 women CEOs. Absolutely amazing. Parker Hannifin, another company with a female, Sherwin-Williams, just some really big established brand names. But what do you see next from the evolution of this category of women CEOs?
Yeah, you raise an interesting point. Like there are, so many amazing women at the top of business around the world who are leading these really marquee companies that are so crucially important to the world and to society. But as you say, there are only about 50 female CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. That's 50 out of 500.
Right.
So that's just around 10%,
Right.
which is really not that much, nowhere close to parity. And so we have a long way to go still. So we're kind of in this era where there has been so much progress compared to where we started, but seem to have in some ways, hit a wall. We've been stuck at that kind of 10% level for the past couple of years. And now, of course, after spending the past year with many companies reevaluating their kind of formalized programs, whether they call it DEI or whether they call it something else, that have helped many women and underrepresented people advance in their careers. We're probably in a period of lag where we're not seeing the full impact that will have yet. And so there's always the potential for backsliding. And so I think that's why it's very important that we continue this coverage and are able to show both the stories of what these women are accomplishing, the challenges that they're up against, and also just the amazing business stories that often go undertold, but are not even related to the fact that they're women at all.
Right. Well, now I want you to definitely tell me about some of those business stories that you've come across. Tell us about the summit as well that you host every year. It seems like an incredible, thrilling, exciting event where people can come and talk about some of those experiences.
Yeah, the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit is an amazing event. I have many incredible colleagues who really are so crucial to bringing that to life. It started as a gathering of saying, we've identified these are the women in American business, and now, they need an opportunity and a place to meet each other and learn from each other. And so Fortune was really able to be that convener and bring these women of the business world together. Today, it's a really vibrant event that kind of brings together the most senior women in business around the world and in the US, alongside really influential figures from culture, entertainment, sports, politics. And so, there's now many different, Fortune was kind of the first in this space, and now there are other ways for women to connect. But I think the kind of journalistic lens we bring to it and our focus on business has really been a key differentiator as we figured out what women need today.
And when do you typically hold the event, and where, and how many people usually attend?
Yeah, it's a exclusive by design, invite only event. Okay. So it's not gigantic. It alternates between the West Coast in California and the East Coast in Washington, D.C. And so this year will be in California in October.
Okay. Fantastic. So so you coming into this position and then managing that program, what do you think has been the greatest learning elements from the program, coming into this and really learning from these very established leaders? What do you think has been your biggest takeaway, given that you get to see a lot of the behind the scenes activities and your engagement with them is just amazing?
Yeah, I think, I've definitely had the opportunity to be exposed to some of the most influential, smartest women in business, as well as, within Fortune, some amazing journalists. And I think one of my takeaways has been that, no one is really thinking about your career as much as you are. And so really the importance of being proactive and identifying what you want and what path you want to be on. And for me, I'm coming to this as a journalist. And so I'm having the opportunity to meet all these amazing CEOs and executives, but that's not necessarily the path that I'm on in my own career. Right. And so being able to take what works and doesn't work for me, the lessons that apply to myself and my colleagues as more, writers and journalists is really been a fascinating journey.
Well, you mentioned something that I think that I've been looking at for several decades, and that's the concept of being proactive in your careers. And I'd love to, I've not attended the summit. I'd love to come just as an observer, as a media person in any capacity, because I think there's so much to be learned. But that proactive piece is really critical, because the feedback that I get is, how do you be proactive as a female without feeling like you're just overbearing? Like, how do you be proactive and build that career like some of the others would, and create your own space without being necessarily blocked for having been that proactive.
Yeah, it's certainly true that like the society that we're all raised in can lead to women being scrutinized or penalized for behaviors that would not be viewed the same way coming from a man. I think we often respond badly to the quality of ambition in women. It's something, especially you see that a lot in politics, where you're really seeing the impact on voters and their view of female candidates. But it's true in business as well. And so I think, there's kind of two approaches to it, like really thinking about the society that we live in and why that is the way it is and how to change it, as well as like practical tips for women for how to work around that in a world in which you can't necessarily wait for an entire society to change.
Right. Now, I'm trying to remember, is it Sheryl Sandberg that was at Facebook, if I remember correctly? And have you had a chance to spend time with her? Her book was very popular, by the way, Lean In. And I suspect it speaks to a lot of the same concepts.
Yeah, Lean In certainly defined an era of advice for women in the workplace.
Yeah. Quite amazing. She had quite a career there. I think she helped in many ways transform the company, even though she didn't have the CEO title, but transform it in ways that a lot of CEOs would at other companies. Now, I was recently, go ahead.
Oh no, yes, she was very critical to bringing Facebook into its, as we know it today, as a mammoth profitable business.
Absolutely. I was rooting recently. I know Walmart had an opportunity to elevate one of their senior members, females, to the senior CEO role. And I was excited. And what's fascinating, I've tracked Walmart forever. And I don't think a lot of people realize that it's the largest company in the world in terms of total revenue. With over 2 million employees, just a very large operation, very sophisticated operation. So I was rooting for that promotion for their CEO as well.
Yes, that was some recent news. Catherine Mitlay, who had been CEO of Walmart International, was seen as a potential contender to take over the CEO job at Walmart, which, as you said, is the largest company in the world, the largest retailer in the world, and has been number one on the Fortune 500 for more than a dozen years.
Right.
And just a couple months ago announced that they had chosen a different candidate for the role, John Furner. And then just recently, Catherine, who had been the candidate who was being watched as a contender, has now said that she's leaving Walmart.
Okay.
And I think it kind of speaks to, when you're looking at female leadership, this balance of the macro and the individual, where on the macro level, of course, we want women to be represented in the biggest, most consequential jobs in the world. We want them to be running Fortune 500 companies because that influences the world and the society that we all live in. But on the individual level, oftentimes it comes down to a person and what they're envisioning for their own career and the own choices they make. And sometimes those two things align and sometimes they don't. And so I think we try to approach this through the lens of journalists, of understanding the impact for the world, while not, speaking too much about whatever might have been going on the individual level.
Podcasts are so popular, even monkeys are doing it.
75% of Americans listen to podcasts monthly. That's 210 million people in the United States alone. And yes, podcasts are profitable. Joe Rogan is making $30 million per year. Your content, your knowledge is worth sharing. Don't just dream it, do it. Visit andycostafilms.com/podcast and turn your content into leaks.
Looking at kind of the next generation of females coming into leadership roles, what do you think might be their greatest challenge today? Do you think AI will drive how they lead or how they ascend to that role? Is there a new technology that you think that they can utilize to help propel them? Like, where do you see technology or something innovative happening in the marketplace that will help drive the next selection process for many of these women leaders?
I don't think AI is preventing women from getting the biggest jobs in corporate America because, women are very interested in evolving technology and AI. And in fact, we're seeing a lot of women in this kind of next chapter of AI companies where it's moving beyond the initial kind of technological phase to the commercialization phase. We're seeing a lot of female executives join companies like OpenAI to help bring AI into this next era as, figuring out things like advertising models and really the business of AI. But I think one of the biggest challenges for women is kind of what we alluded to, which is kind of whether or not there is an explicit focus on keeping an eye on whether women are in the position to get these jobs, and if things like formalized programs to support rising women in their careers go away, if things like flexible work go away that really impact whether women with caregiving responsibilities can be in the office in the same way. We're seeing the impact of women who do choose remote work, who are promoted at lower rates than women who work in office, while men who work remotely are still on track for promotions. I think these are all the factors that will really influence who we see at the top in 5 to 10 years.
And I suspect you discussed this at your summits, and I've evaluated this for you. How do you level that out to make sure that they're getting the same recognition, compensation, access to those next stages?
Yeah, I think that's really a question for our businesses and employers.
Yeah.
But I think from where we sit, that's one reason that I believe that the Most Powerful Women franchise is important, because we are viewing these women not just as covering the state of female leadership, but also just covering stories about business stories about the companies that they're leading and about the roles that they're in, which are often stories that are not necessarily always at the very top of the business press. And so with that eye for story selection and that special attention to what these executives are doing, it can often have the side effect of both being, important, engaging stories for readers and also kind of raising the profiles of these women as they figure out what comes next. And that's not necessarily our core purpose, but it's certainly, we have a role to play in that ecosystem.
That's amazing. Now, you attended one of the top universities in the country, if not the world. How did you end up at Georgetown University, and what did you study? Did you study journalism in school as well?
Yeah, I love my time at Georgetown. I was, very interested in a lot of great schools and ended up there. Georgetown didn't at the time have a true journalism program, so I majored in government political science, as was kind of the trend being in Washington, D.C. But I was very involved in our college paper, which was called The Hoya. I was the editor-in-chief of that paper.
Oh, wow.
I would say that was where I spent most of my time as a college student, was really in the offices of The Hoya, late nights, closing the paper at 4 a.m. and really learning the foundations of journalism there.
So, you have to tell me what that looks like. And I think a lot of times people might not understand really what hard work looks like. One of the toughest questions that I often receive from maybe college students is, what does a typical day look like? But you mentioned being in your editor's role and working on the newspaper at 4 a.m. in the morning. What does that feel like? I'm sure there are a lot of great values that it taught you, meeting deadlines and staying up nearly 24 hours if you have to get a product out. What was it that you learned from that process, and what was it like?
I learned so much from that, including just, basic skills of journalism and especially newspapers. But I would say one of the biggest lessons for the business world was kind of how to operate on a team and think about priorities across your organization, not just for you. For instance, for me as a college student and in various editing roles at the paper, if I, was late for a paper that I was writing for a class or wasn't as prepared as I would want to be for a test, that would only impact me. Right. But if I missed my deadlines for the paper, that would impact 50 other people and slow down the process. And so I don't know if that decision making was necessarily the best for my own personal academic success. And it all turned out okay in the end. But it definitely taught me how to consider the priorities across an organization and your role within it.
Well, you know what's interesting that you bring that up is just understanding the impact of your individual responsibilities on the entire organization and the people that are associated with. And that's probably a really good business point as well, that especially the small business, but even the large companies have to think about. If I make decision A, this is how it will not only impact the company from a financial standpoint, but this is how it impacts the 1,000 employees and their families that work for the organization. And I suspect that you're seeing a lot of those conversations as well, where people are taking really a selfless approach. I know sometimes people think these CEOs, they only care about their income. But the reality that I've seen is that they absolutely care about all the families that are part of their business family, right? Their employees and the employees' families and their kids and their livelihood. It's a big responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, I think great leaders do, the best leaders do. And that's one reason that, it is important for women to be in these positions so that you have people with a diverse array of experiences and perspectives who, whether or not they've had families of their own, whether or not they've been through the challenges of balancing work and caregiving demands, so that you have people who really innately understand that and think about it in their decision making, while they also think about business priorities.
Right. I know we're nearing the end of our first session. When you come back, I definitely want to talk about maybe the most fascinating CEO that you've had a chance to spend some time with, the most fascinating company that you've had a chance to observe. But as we wrap this one up, tell me about social media and maybe Gen Z. How is that influencing a lot of what you're finding in business today?
Yeah, I think, of course, social media has been changing rapidly and is now, it's a long ways away from when people would say like, oh my God, that was, the intern posted that. Like right. Social media, these are really core business functions with senior teams leading these accounts and profiles that really drive business results. And I think, Gen Z has grown up with social media, has really an innate understanding of how to use these platforms. And I think has fun with it. And, I think understands this kind of video first, more authentic approach to social media. Millennials for a while, during the 2010s, like our social media era was very polished and it was very about like Instagram, like, looking perfect. And now we're in this era of authenticity. And I think it's sometimes hard for businesses and brands to fully embrace that, but we're seeing a lot of them trying with interesting results.
And what's interesting in the conversations that I've had with high schoolers and college students now, I think they speak about this not knowing the history of the evolution of social media and some of the other media platforms, but they speak about that authenticity. And I'm amazed that they describe that in their understanding of social media today, that it's really important for them to have someone on those platforms that feels authentic. And I'm amazed by that transition, but you just mentioned it as well. Like, what are you hearing and seeing with this concept of authenticity?
Yeah, I think it's just become table stakes. I think if you're not authentic, consumers can smell it, especially as a consumer brand or as like a personal individual account. It's just so important, trying to project a sheen of perfectionism just doesn't really resonate in that same way anymore.
Now, what was this 6-7 thing that I heard about from 2020?
I think that's Gen Alpha, and I don't have kids, so I don't know if I can be an expert on that one.
I know it gained a lot of attention. I saw everyone kind of referencing it back in the end of 2025. What platforms do you think are having the most impact now on businesses? Do you see businesses spending more effort with their social media departments in one platform versus the other, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or some of the other platforms that are coming up? Twitch, I think, is another one that I hear about periodically.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what kind of business you are. I think for consumer brands that are selling products, certainly Instagram and TikTok are hugely important. I think depending on your exact customer base, one can be more important than the other. And then when you look at business and thought leadership, I think LinkedIn is a very vibrant platform that has really put a lot of effort into becoming, not just a place to network, but like a true social media platform where, it seems like one of the secrets to it feeling like a true conversation there is that there is a requirement to have your real name attached. And so you avoid some of the not necessarily super productive conversation that can take place on other platforms like X, for example. And so I would say, depending on what your purpose is, those would be the main three I would gravitate towards.
Gotcha. So Emma, how did you end up in this area of work? Did you intern, by the way, when you were Georgetown, did you intern on Capitol Hill? Did you start kind of in that direction and made your way to media? And what was your progression? How did someone become Emma? Because what you're managing as an editor of The Most Powerful Women is a really big responsibility.
Going to school in Washington, D.C. was great because you did have the opportunity to intern, during the semester rather than just, over the summer when you had time off away from school. I did not intern on Capitol Hill. Most of my internships were all in the journalism media space.
Okay.
When I was in DC, I interned for USA Today, which is based in Northern Virginia, and interned for their money section, which got me on the path to business journalism. And then later, my first jobs after school were also in newspapers. I interned in Northern New Jersey for the Bergen Record, which is an incredible paper, as well as worked my first year out of college for the Houston Chronicle in Houston, Texas.
So you actually lived in Houston, Texas as well during that period of time, or?
I did for a year. It's a great city.
Very cool. Very cool. When did you know that you were going to journalism? Because it sounds like you had that plan well before college. Was there something that happened that took you in that direction of journalism?
I was always interested in it, and I think it's kind of something you have to be exposed to. I grew up in New Jersey in the suburbs of New York, and my dad was a journalist in radio for places like WNYC and Bloomberg, so very different because it was radio, but definitely knew about journalism as a thing that you could do. Was always kind of waiting to see if I became interested in anything else, because I definitely had some voices in my ear telling me like, you'll never make any money and like do something else. But nothing else ever really struck me as something that I thought I would be passionate about. So I just decided to go for it.
Well, let's close on this then, because I think you mentioned two things here, that passion and the comments about making money. And I think what I can say now that I'm older is that sometimes if you follow that passion, the money will work its way out. But I've heard the same thing now for several decades. If you go and become an artist, how are you going to make a living was the comment. So what would you say to those people looking and having to decide between following their passion and then just making an income, and what that translates to from a career perspective?
I would say that, of course, you know your situation better than anyone, and there are always real factors at play when it comes to making a living and making a livelihood. But, if you have something you're passionate about and you see a path for a way that that could be your career, and whether or not it's, the exact most creative or artistic version, maybe you see like I'm very talented and passionate about art, and here's a way that I could do something artistic within, more of a traditional job structure, if that is something that is important to you.
Right.
I think following that passion can be really instructive because, if you just kind of, I went to Georgetown where a lot of people go straight into kind of the consulting pipeline, the Wall Street banking pipeline, and those are really tough jobs. And if you're not interested in it, you'll probably flame out at some point and need to pivot and not get burnt out. And so I think doing something you're passionate about can really, as you said, lead to success later on, even if it's not quite as clear how you're going to get there.
And maybe not as immediate as some others might seem, some other careers might seem. Right. I get it.
No.
Emma, thank you for joining us. I know that we've been working to have you on for a while, and you're incredible. Your work is absolutely amazing, and I appreciate and value all that you're doing for businesses around the globe and helping to spur leadership within people, encouraging them to pursue their passions in upper level positions, but also just generally in business. It's the business segment is just so much fun, right? There's so many opportunities that I think can be had in one's career. And so you're helping to drive a lot of that insight and information. And I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share, and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.